Welcome back, everyone, to World Gone Weird. Buckle up because the weirdness dial has been cranked to 11.
Hey everyone, glad to be here. Yeah, it feels like things are just piling up, you know? Trying to stay positive though.
Positive? Otto, with a straight face. I'm expecting a full-blown dumpster fire today. The world seems determined to give us one.
Indeed. Let's see if we can dissect this chaos with a bit of scientific rigor, shall we?
All right, hit us with the weird, Jesus. What fresh hell awaits us today?
Well, we have Trump's latest tariff tantrum, the Texas flooding disaster in the wake of government cuts, and I understand a school extortion situation down in Peru. Quite a collection of weird.
Tariffs, floods, extortion. Sounds like a normal Tuesday in 2025. Where do we even start with this mess?
Maybe we should start with the Texas floods. That's a human tragedy, and it's important to remember that people are really suffering. 95 dead, and the government cuts seem to be exacerbating the problems.
985? Wow. See, now that's what I call a bad vacation. Though I bet the real estate prices are plummeting. Silver lining, maybe?
Sarah, seriously?
What? I'm just saying, someone's got to see the humor in the abyss. Otherwise, we'll all just drown in despair, much like those poor folks in Texas. Too soon?
Perhaps a bit, but let's focus on the facts. The CNN article highlights a connection between Trump's government cuts and the disaster response. Specifically, staffing shortages at the National Weather Service and FEMA.
So the government, or the lack thereof, is directly contributing to this catastrophe? I knew there was something fishy about this. All this talk of act of God makes my blood boil.
But, it's also a very complex issue. I saw reports that authorities just couldn't get the word out properly. You can't always blame everything on budget cuts. Sometimes it's also communication breakdowns.
That's a valid point. Rick Spinrad from NOAA mentioned a potential breakdown in connectivity between forecasters and emergency services. The San Antonio NWS office was missing a key coordinator.
Oh, so the Weather Service is now a lemonade stand, running on hopes and dreams. The government should be building arc fleets, not laying off weather reporters, coordinators.
Okay, it's easy to make jokes, but we need to be fair. The article also says that officials, still in shock, said they were caught off guard. Maybe the warnings weren't clear enough, or frequent enough, or, loud enough.
That highlights the need for rigorous risk assessment and mitigation protocols, especially in regions known to be susceptible to natural disasters. Refinement of existing flash flood risk models may be needed, possibly incorporating more sophisticated measures of precipitation intensity and terrain-specific runoff.
So the question is, did the potential for disaster get overlooked or underestimated? It seems like that's the case here.
Exactly. It's like yelling fire in a crowded theater, except no one's yelling and the theater's already on fire. Complicated humor is my thing, guys.
Maybe we need better apps, better emergency broadcasts, something that really grabs people's attention and tells them, hey, you're about to die, move it.
Oh, that's just brilliant. Let the states handle it, even though some states are basically bankrupt and run by, shall we say, incompetent leadership? Sounds like a recipe for disaster. Pun intended.
Well, in theory, empowering states could make them more responsive to local needs, but it also could create disparities. What happens to the states that can't afford to handle big disasters?
Precisely. It raises concerns about unequal access to resources and support based on geographical location and state-level funding.
So basically, if you live in a poor state, you're screwed. Got it. The American dream, drowning in debt and floodwater. How poetic.
Okay, we get it, Sarah. So from a practical standpoint, what could be done differently in these vulnerable situations? Better preparedness training for summer camps, maybe?
The summer camp incident underscores the need to prioritize safety, especially within vulnerable communities. Improved evacuation protocols and infrastructure resilience are essential. Also, it needs to be clear what metrics were used to estimate casualties and missing persons in the area.
And maybe not build summer camps right next to rivers prone to flash flooding. Call me crazy, but that seems like common sense.
Jimmy's being a little harsh, but it's true. Location, 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 and maybe a little more research before setting up shop.
Indeed, and to incorporate real-time data on changing conditions like temperature, humidity, and debris field growth into resource allocation strategies.
So basically, less thoughts and prayers, more science and sensible planning. Got it.
It is all about balance. We can all take personal responsibility. It is hard, though, when you have an outside force stepping in to cut support.
And there it is. Blame everything on the cuts. Never any personal responsibility.
You know, while we are at it, I do not get why everyone is so worried about the weather. Do they forget the Ice Age? Like, everyone needs to calm down about a little rain.
While it is true there have been fluctuations in weather over the history of the planet, it is the rapid change that humans are experiencing that is concerning.
Okay, moving on. There is a ton of news about tariffs. Trump is threatening them on everyone.
Oh, here we go again. Trump's tariff tirades. Like a toddler throwing a tantrum in a global sandbox.
Right, so the BBC article mentions he's threatening tariffs on 14 countries, including Japan and South Korea. He's delaying some of them until August, but the threat is still there.
Tariffs on up to 14 countries, as if he's playing a game of Risk.
He argues it protects American businesses, boosts domestic manufacturing. But economists say it'll raise prices for Americans and reduce trade. Who are we supposed to believe?
Well, tariffs are tricky. They can protect domestic industries, but they also make imports more expensive. That increased cost hits consumers.
It's a zero-sum game based on who can outlast the other in a financial war. It always is the consumer that is impacted. Where is the long-term planning?
So it's a tax on Americans disguised as a way to make America great again? Classic Trump.
It's like playing economic Jenga. One wrong move, and the whole thing collapses. I'm just waiting for the moment when we start trading goats for semiconductors again. Progress.
And this Al Jazeera article mentions he's also threatening an additional 10% tariff on B, or ICS, countries aligning themselves with anti-American policies. What does that even mean?
Anti-American policies? Whatever lines up against Trump's agenda of the moment. Anyone who dares disagree with the supreme leader gets punished.
Oh, so now we're playing global dictator? Wonderful. I'm picturing Trump sitting on a golden throne, deciding which countries are naughty or nice. I would watch that show.
But doesn't the United States benefit from being the world police? Does that entitle the USA to step in on everything all the time?
That's a debate for another time. It could be seen that the US's actions as a neutral broker could possibly create biases.
And what about the EU? He was threatening them with a 50% tax last week, but now it sounds like they might be getting a pass. What gives?
Apparently, Ursula von der Leyen had a good exchange with Trump. Maybe she massaged his ego enough to avoid the tariffs. Who knows?
It is the equivalent of bringing a bouquet to the head of a company, hoping you do not get laid off. I think if the other countries would use science, they could win an argument and avoid the tariffs.
Okay, but what about these deals he has struck? The article mentions deals with the UK and Vietnam, but they apparently raised tariffs compared to before he came back into office. So, what's the point?
That is the potential disruption of trade with seemingly little gain for anyone, and that is concerning.
Ah, classic global turmoil.
You know, it feels like we are just talking about tariffs. Is there anything in the world that isn't related to tariffs?
I feel like we should talk about the school extortion.
Oh God, no. Really? I am trying to keep this conversation above board.
Now, if what I read online is true, schools are being extorted by criminal gangs down in Peru.
Schools being held hostage by gangs reminds me of a particularly absurd episode of The Simpsons, only way more real. I wonder if the extortionists have a gangster school curriculum?
A tragic situation. We need to look at these situations. The vulnerability of these communities and the desperation that drives the gangs are disturbing, yes, but it needs to be looked at.
I'm deeply concerned about the extortion of schools in Peru. That systemic solutions can be implemented to help these vulnerable people and communities and break this cycle of violence.
I do not think that is what's happening. I can only imagine the corruption of it all. Not even one area of our world has avoided it.
That is true, but these people, they need support.
Yeah, and where is the money going to come from exactly when everyone is at each other's throats? When everyone has their own tariffs? Sigh.
Wow. All this is making me feel kinda helpless.
Well, while everything is interconnected, the main theme seems to be chaos.
So the world is weird.
Well, folks, it has been fun. Do not let it all get you down.
Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Later, weirdos.